It's me, Channel Dog. How are you doing? I, for one, am perturbed and a little bit confused. I won't lie. In an interview with CBR, the Russo Brothers discussed the MCU version of Spider-Man, and finally addressed his origin story. Now, there is the sentiment that Uncle Ben is maybe the most influential factor in Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man. Spider-Man's inaction inadvertently leads to Uncle Ben's death, and that defines Spider-Man because he's determined to take responsibility for that instance. Now, with regard to the MCU Spider-Man, there were kind of two camps. One camp was happy to not see Uncle Ben get killed again, because we've already seen it a couple of times before. Why waste time retreading ground that the other versions have already trodden? But then there's the other camp that feel that Uncle Ben should still feel a bit more present in MCU Spider-Man movies, because of how integral he is to that origin story. There's also the criticism that Iron Man feels too tied to Spider-Man's origins and almost like an Uncle Ben surrogate. And others have said that the MCU is kind of too vague about it, which is something that I push back against, advocating that Uncle Ben was still a part of the subtext of Peter Parker in this universe. Peter's speech to Tony Stark certainly seems to imply it.
Look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
And then there have been other little subtle nods to the existence of Uncle Ben. I really never liked the Iron Boy Jr. shorthand for this Spider-Man because it just isn't the case. He was wearing his own homemade Spider-Man hoodie costume before Iron Man intervened, and I thought the MCU's handling of Spider-Man was fine because it felt like his story began at Civil War, and it felt like a story detached from the origins. If Uncle Ben was pivotal to his origins, then maybe Iron Man was pivotal to this story, just not in the same way as Uncle Ben. Because this isn't the beginning of Spider-Man we're seeing here, it's just a very early chapter, a Spider-Man year one, if you will. And I figured that just because we're not showing that doesn't mean it didn't happen. But we do finally have something of an official answer as to what was going on with the MCU Spider-Man's origin story, as the Russo brothers discussed it in an interview with CBR about Civil War's 10th anniversary. I'll read this excerpt here. Spider-Man was one of my favorite characters growing up, if not my favorite, said Joe Russo. And what I related to was this idea of a kid with incredible responsibility, right? And I think you could manifest that responsibility through accidental death, right? And feeling the pressure and the sense of loss in your life in a way that would keep the spirit that we wanted. Okay, so with this part here, Joe Russo clearly understands Spider-Man here. But then this next excerpt kind of gets hit by a train. So it goes, but what Tom Holland is as an actor, if he blamed himself for Uncle Ben's death, I think he becomes a very different character. So in our minds, no, he wasn't responsible for Uncle Ben's death. That would have been a different interpretation, a more intense interpretation of the character. So there was a part of me that was wondering if, like, maybe there was a context to this that they were missing. If maybe they were like, oh, of course he didn't shoot his own uncle or something along those lines. Maybe they didn't register the inadvertency of it. But no, it is pretty explicit here that they are saying that if Peter Parker blamed himself for Uncle Ben's death, he would be a very different character. What do you mean? Joe Russo, I need to know what you mean by this. Are we implying that if Spider-Man blamed himself for Uncle Ben's death, he'd become a different character, he'd become Spider-Man? And then where it says, but what Tom Holland is as an actor, are we implying that Tom Holland couldn't convey that? Are we implying that we had to infantilize Spider-Man and make him a bit more pure because Tom Holland? Why would that be the case? He's clearly very good at playing grief-stricken, vengeful Spideys. But then also, what was he talking about here?
Look, when you can do the things I can, but you don't, and the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
Now, I will say, we can look at the wording just a little bit. We can maybe unravel some nuance here, if you'll indulge me in a little bit of bargaining. They mentioned that if he blamed himself for Uncle Ben's death, he'd become a very different character. Right. There is a difference between taking responsibility for Uncle Ben's death and blaming himself for Uncle Ben's death. To take responsibility for it is to act, to move forward. Blame is instead a sense of reflection. It thinks backward. So it could be, and he'd have to be pretty well mentally adjusted to do this, that he feels responsible for letting that robber get away, but blames the robber for shooting Uncle Ben. But the thing is, I don't think these words were plotted that carefully. Maybe they're aware of the reputation of MCU Spider-Man online in fandom spaces. Maybe they're playing into that for marketing purposes, get people talking. But it just sucks because I thought just because they didn't show it, that didn't mean it didn't happen, was a really reasonable argument. We didn't need to see the origin again, but that doesn't mean the origin is contradicted. And now I'm hearing that it is contradicted. And that people who seemed to be kind of jumping to conclusions were actually correct. But what's weird is that the writing does seem to contradict this. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is in no way shocked to hear of the death of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. He responds, "I know," when Aunt May tells him that with great power must also come great responsibility. And then what he was talking about in Captain America Civil War, what's that all about now? Well, this doesn't have to be completely senseless, but I kind of have to reframe my feelings on MCU Spider-Man now. We really don't know where Peter's motivation to become Spider-Man came from now. We have a year one at the expense of an origin for Spidey, and I think if you have a Spider-Man whose origin is so unique that he's not responsible for Uncle Ben's death, you'd maybe need to show that. And there is a version of MCU Spider-Man that actually did. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is similar to MCU Spider-Man, simply taking place in an alternate reality. Uncle Ben died off-screen prior to Peter even being bitten by the radioactive spider, which happened because of a bootstrap paradox. In Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, Uncle Ben does influence the values that Peter Parker carries growing up. In Peter and May's interactions, you can see that Uncle Ben left a big impact. So Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man not because he's trying to make up for a failure in judgment. He wants to do right by Uncle Ben purely out of love and wanting to do him justice. Now, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man was always presented as a new take on Spider-Man mythology, kind of a remix, if you will. And I thought going kind of wild with the origin story was an appropriate fit for that. And I did enjoy the implication that Uncle Ben inspired Peter Parker to become Spider-Man in life rather than in death. It's a little more idealistic and it's very endearing. You could argue that it is declawed, and I wouldn't disagree with that. Stories should be very challenging. But Peter Parker was challenged in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man by a conflict of values between everything he grew up with Uncle Ben versus the allure of the big picture thinking of the charismatic Norman Osborn, who seems all too eager to be Peter's father figure number 3. It's different, but I like it. It's a really strong reinvention. There have also been two different kind of writing mentalities applied to Spider-Man's origins as well. Some like to approach it as more kind of a destiny thing with the web of life and destiny, or maybe it was Peter's parents that designed the spider for him, while others value that chance encounter, it could have happened to anyone kind of value. And with the bootstrap paradox caused by Doctor Strange, it kind of ends up being both. It's chance because what are the odds that this is going to happen to you, but it's now destiny because it was accidentally weaved into time itself. I found Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man to be pretty refreshing in that regard. Again, different doesn't necessarily mean bad. Comic accuracy being one-to-one isn't a complete obligation. But for a centralized Spider-Man that is part of the greater Marvel universe, I do think it is important to be as authentic to the source material as possible. Make something that kind of represents an all-rounder Spider-Man. And they've definitely been pushing more in the direction of fan appeasement recently. Look at Spider-Man Brand New Day. It does clearly address a lot of the criticisms that people had on the Home trilogy. It's a back-to-basics Spider-Man. Maybe just the general ambiguity of it was always the intention from the get-go because they didn't really have any time to get Spider-Man into the story. It's obvious that Spider-Man was a very late addition into Captain America Civil War, fully CGI suit and all, so it could be that they genuinely hadn't really thought of that, and maybe this is just them speaking in retrospect. And maybe they haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home or the trailers for Spider-Man Brand New Day because he does appear to be becoming a more intense interpretation of the character. But give me your takes on this in the comments below. Do you think there's more to what the Russos said than meets the eye? Are you cool with what the Russo brothers said? Like the video if you liked it, dislike the video if you disliked it, and the hype apparently helps a lot, so why not give that a try? Or don't, I don't own you. How about a special shout out for the people who own me, the patrons in the $5 and above tier? They are Manelza, KB, Twilord, Biotin, Sirius the Skeptic, and Mr. SP. Kale Bennett, if you read this, you're kinda British. You can't just go back on what you're saying, Kale Bennett. Dare Denny, Sad Goku, Ghostly Phantom, Xanderwolf, Channel Pup, Just Another Evil Robot Clone, Claiming Discarded Naming Rights, Council of Geeks, SSSO6, Carl X, RT0, Marv Animation, Grant Allen, Josh Strider, Silver, Ben Raven, Basic Content, Gideon Wells, Pressplayer Jason, Joseph Tribble, and Cho Henshin. Thank you folks so much for your generosity. As for the rest of you, my channel is an all-you-can-eat buffet. Go grab yourself another plate. Peace.